One of the good things with this is you can break it down into some fairly easily manageable steps. We've got the drawing, background is all going to be wet on wet, no real detail. We've got a light wash here, and then we're going to have a darker wash here. So this is probably the most complex part of the painting, doing this. But because it's a smallish shape, it shouldn't be that difficult anyway. Hopefully you'll enjoy it, and also gives us an opportunity to play around with some rocks again. This is one of those times where you almost can paint everything I've got in the photo, maybe reduce some of the rocks, but I think I've cropped it reasonably well. Okay, so for the background, I'm just going to mix a range of greens. And there's some bright greens there, so as soon as I think bright greens, I start with my Aureolin. And then we'll add some Cobalt Turquoise to that. And that's pretty good actually. Then here, we'll just grab some Aureolin, a little bit of turquoise, and some French Ultramarine. This green here, I'm just going to mix the same colour but add a little bit of burnt sienna to it, which is here. And this will be duller still, because the burnt sienna has red in it, and again, that's the complement of green. There we go. We'll just leave that there for now. Okay, so I'll wet the paper again. Now, looking at the reference, there's some quite dark colours along here, so I'm going to just add more burnt sienna and more French ultramarine. So we'll start with a very weak cobalt blue. With just a hint of burnt sienna. This light air is reflecting the sky, but it's also mixing with the colour of the water. That's pretty good. And then here, again, a little bit of cobalt blue and more burnt sienna, but you don't want it too bright. And then I'm going to have just a small puddle here of just thicker cobalt blue and burnt sienna. I'll just get some clean water and just paint around this shape here. we're going to work on the rocks. In particular, this rock here, it's sort of like the feature rock, and that'll make it a bit easier when it comes to painting the water and any reflections we put in it. If we look at the photo here, we've got this lovely golden light that helps give some direction to the eye. And because it's quite a warm and light tone, I'm going to paint them first on all the rocks, just as a flat wash, and then we'll start working on these bigger rocks once that's dried. This highlight here and that warmth is coming from the sun hitting the rocks. If we look at this side of the rock, and to the same extent some of these other rocks, can you see how much cooler this looks? Because what's happening, the sun's not hitting this side. The light is coming from the sky, and that's where that blue cool tint is coming from. So think in terms of warmth facing the sun, and then coolness away from the sun in the shadow area. It's still, reasonably light toned. There's a lot of light in a blue sky, as opposed to under here where it's not getting any light from the sky or the sun. For this golden colour, I'll start with some weak cad orange. Now I don't want it to be too strong, however, but that's pretty good. I might add just a hint of burnt sienna. Just a little bit more cad orange. Now, because these are light tones, it's better to go too light rather than too dark. And especially with the cadmium colours, if you go too thick, then they lose that watercolour translucency. And you can always darken them later. But this is pretty good. I've got a piece of candle wax, I've got some salt. We'll start by mixing some of these colours. So I see a little bit of red in there, not a lot of it, dull red. So into this sort of browny mix here, I'll just add some Scarlet Lake. Any warm red will do. And we're only going to need a touch. I've got, bucket loads there than what I need. It's very pale greens, maybe. All I'm going to do is put some Cobalt Turquoise in here, and we'll use that for some of the splatter. And then obviously we've got this dark brown. That's our biggest colour, albeit in different tones. So we'll mix a lot of that. And for that, we'll grab lots of burnt sienna. And lots of French ultramarine. And the French ultramarine granulates a lot, and that will add its own level of texture. And this face here is going to be lighter in tone than this face here. So you've got to keep that in mind. If you go too dark for this face, then you're almost needing to use pure paint to get the right tonal variations. That'll do. And then there's all these little white patches. So what we're going to do, I'm going to use my candle wax. I'm just going to look for an edge here. The thing with candle wax is once it goes on, it doesn't go anywhere. And you can apply the candle wax over another colour, and that'll preserve the colour underneath. That'll do for that. The other thing too, have some gouache handy, white gouache. Just regular Winsor and Newton designer's gouache. Not very expensive, and a little goes a long way. Okay, so now I've put the candle wax on. Now we're going to go in with the paint, and we're going to be playing then with some splatter, maybe some gouache, some salt, anything to create the mottled texture here and along there, you know, and we'll have fun. So let's get maybe a size 12 brush, and I'll get rid of this orange color here because I suspect I'll be mixing other colors in here. This color here is what I need for this area, but there's some other areas where it's a little bit lighter and a little bit darker, so we'll adjust that as we go. That's just a bit too strong. In fact, what I'm going to do, where I see some this green, I'll put some of that in first. Just some quick dry brush strokes is good. I want a lighter tone of this, so I'm just going to drag it over here and add some water to it. That's better. This is quite a bit darker. All the way across to here. This is a bit darker on this side. Keep your spray bottle handy. You may need to give it a light spray if it starts looking a little bit on the muddy side. What I picked up here in this little paint well, that's where I normally dump any, if I want clean cad orange, for instance, I'll just clean the top off and then I just scrape it in there, because with all the impurities that are in there, that just gives me a dull cad orange sort of mixture. So I just pick that up every now and then when I need it. And you can see we're starting to give this rock some light. It's quite a bit darker in here. That'll do. Now we'll get some red up here. Now if you don't want the paint to flow a lot, you pick up the paint and then tap the brush on a towel. That will reduce the amount of paint in it, so that way you won't get as much of the paint flowing down the paper. All right, now let's get even darker paint. So what I'll do is I'll pick up some of this. Probably should have squeezed the water out of my brush first. But anyway, just add more paint to it. Can't be that thick that it doesn't come off the brush. You know, before these dots dry, just quickly lift them out. Not a problem so much on the water. And already I'm starting to think, do I need to do too much more with this, because this rock, that little bit of splatter has made it come alive. This area here needs some more texture to it. So we'll get some more of this grey cad orange mixture. Just take out most of the paint, just touching the top of the paper. It's pretty good. Let's break up this hard edge. And because we're doing this as a learning exercise, let's go ahead and sprinkle a little bit of salt on it anyway. You don't want too much of the salt, because a little goes a long, long way. You know, I put that in my hand and barely used a 20th of it. Along this edge here, the paint has been flowing down, and if I tilt it, you can see that big bead, see that bead of paint there? Now right now that's not causing any problem because this area is still quite wet, but if I don't get rid of a lot of that moisture, what will happen is at some point this area will dry just beyond damp, and then it'll start to suck that water up and you'll get some sort of cauliflower along the rock. This is one time when a cauliflower might actually look okay, but there's probably more chance it'll look terrible. So let's just lift that out. And I'm not pressing hard, I'm just touching the top because most of the paint has settled down, and what you're seeing at the top is really just water. Okay. And then I'm going to just lift some of this paint, again very light because I still want the paint to be able to flow. And give me some interesting shape. And later I might go back in and just put in the odd little hard edge into there, but I think that's good enough for this rock. Let's do a bit of work on this rock over here. This one doesn't need as much, and I don't want to lose this green here because that's what's giving us the light, or some of the light on this rock. So I've got all this paint here. I don't want it to be as strong as what I've got on this rock because it's further away, so I'll just move some over here. There was a bit of wetness there that was fairly light, and that's probably diluted this colour enough. Just using the tip of my brush in this case. You could use a fan brush to do this as well, probably do it a bit quicker, but it's not a very big shape. Little dark patches of the green will show the rock through it. And here, I want a little bit of coolness, so I'll add a bit of cerulean. Too strong. And I'm going to just take the edge off there a little bit. throw in a bit of that orange. Okay, and that's good enough. The gouache I'm not going to use. If I need to, I'll do it later. The salt's adding a little bit of extra texture to it. I don't really know whether it's that needed, to tell you the truth, but it's worth experimenting with. And if the rock was bigger and more of a feature, I probably would use it in conjunction with all my different techniques for producing a rock. I'm going to leave that there and let the salt do its thing. going to use some staining colours because it'll show up some of these rocks a little bit better. And the staining colours I'm going to be using Winsor Blue red shade and brown madder. So I'm just adding some brown madder to the Winsor Blue red shade. So these are the shapes we're going to paint in. I'm not going to do all of them, and you can see in my drawing, I haven't even drawn any in, so I'll just really just look at what I see and put some of the shapes in. Add a bit more brown to it. So if you're doing this and you don't have these colours, you're basically just going to use French Ultramarine and burnt Sienna. I have to be a bit careful here because in this area here, see I've got these reflections and then you can't see much of the rock underneath. So I don't want to put in a lot of darks in this area because it'll clash with the reflection of the tree. Okay, we'll just let that dry. Then I'm going to go and paint the main wash. Just looking at it, I might put in a few of these distant rocks as well. Pinning the rocks under the water. But I'll use a lighter mix for these. That'll do. I'm just going to dry all this because while this is staining, until it dries, it's not set as much as I'd like. So let me go and just dry that. So now I'm going to get rid of all this staining colour. And it's going to be a big wash with the main colour being burnt sienna. So we'll just get plenty of burnt sienna. And there was some of this rock colour in there, and that just helps begin to dull the colour, because I don't want just pure burnt sienna. I want it dulled just slightly. And by having this clean, if I want to mix a stronger mixture, I can mix it there, which is what I'm going to do. And again, you can see how strong that looks, but when we test the colour, it's nowhere near as dark as that. It's looking very strong purely because of the depth of the paint, which is why you have to test your colours. With practice, you can tell a lot just by the consistency of the paint. But even then, you test it. The best watercolourists in the world still test their colours. And that's getting better. You can see how much tonal difference there is. In fact, that might just about do us. I'll just add just a fraction more paint. Good. And then here, I'm just going to make a small puddle that's even thicker, and I'll add some French ultramarine to it. And that'll help create a bit of variation with some of these rocks. Back there. Now, the other thing too, back here, there's a hint of the reflection of this green in there. So it wouldn't hurt to have just a small amount of a dull green colour. So I'll just pick up one brush load, a little bit of Aureolin or Winsor Lemon, and just a tiny bit of turquoise. And that'll do that. Again, if you clean my brush, dry it gently. this area here, the tone of this colour is going to be darker than the distance. So I'll pick up some of this paint, drag my brush through the edge of the palette, dip it in water, and then just start with that. think we'll leave it at that.